All right, so now let's take a quick look at what's in these 27 amendments. Over the course of the year, it's going to be really important that you remember what's in almost all of these amendments. I'll let you know which ones that we will never, ever talk about. But we're going to get started with the Bill of Rights. You guys are familiar with this. This is the first 10 amendments. But what you probably don't think about is what these actually do. So, looking purely at the Bill of Rights here, these first 10 amendments, what is important for you to remember is these are what we call civil liberties, because what they do is limit the power of the government. These are 10 written amendments that set clear limits on the powers of the government. When we talk about it in conversation, we're probably likely to say, I have the freedom of speech, or I have the freedom of religion. What the words of the amendment says is that Congress cannot pass a law that limits your freedom of speech. Congress cannot pass a law that establishes a national religion. So each of these things are limits on the power of the government. And another important thing to remember here as we go through them, half of the Bill of Rights hopefully never apply to you. Number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, and number 8, those only deal with people that are being accused of a crime. So the people writing the Constitution here thought this was so important that they devoted half of the Bill of Rights to just protections for people accused of a crime. 9 and 10, when we get to in a minute, those are really important because those allow the Constitution to adapt over time. So, First Amendment, you're probably most familiar with these. Freedom of religion. Government can't set up an official religion. Government can't stop you from practicing your religion however you want. Freedom of speech. We definitely have protections for the things that we want to say, especially if they're political, but doesn't mean you can say anything you want, right? You definitely can't walk into an airport and say, I've got a bomb, and expect freedom of speech to protect you from that. Freedom of press is incredibly important, making sure that our press is not controlled by the government or limited in what it's allowed to report to us. And freedom of assembly is so important. It allows us to get together in groups as an interest group or a political party, or allows us to assemble for a peaceful protest and things like that. Freedom to petition the government, we really won't spend a lot of time talking about. It doesn't come up a lot. Here's the source of a lot of controversy in American politics. The Second Amendment, we'll just very simply call the right to bear arms, but lets us know that because a well-regulated militia is necessary, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So we'll talk a lot about how to interpret that amendment and what that actually means for us. The Third Amendment is one of those amendments that we're probably never going to talk about again. This prevents the quartering of troops. This means that the troops or any government officials cannot demand to stay in your house, come in and say, let us stay here, let us eat your food and things like that. This was a problem in the times of the American Revolution, not really a problem anymore. Although this did come up this summer in some of the protests around the country as local government leaders were trying to reject the federal government assistance in breaking up some of these protests and things like that. So we'll talk about that later. All right, moving into the section where we're dealing with the rights of accused criminals, we have the Fourth Amendment. There are no illegal searches or seizures of property. We're going to spend a lot of time in Unit 3 talking about the details of this, but this means that the government can't search without a warrant, without a probable cause of a crime being committed, a reason to search, and they have to justify that to judges and things like that. Moving on to the Fifth Amendment. This has 4 parts that you need to know. First of all is due process, which really just means that the process of being prosecuted for a crime is supposed to be fair for everyone. It is important that we know these steps, right? That's part of what allows this to be fair. But I know that if I'm interacting with a police officer, that I'm supposed to be informed of my rights. I know that I'm going to have access to a lawyer and things like that. And since all these steps, since all these processes are written and things like that, that gives us the protection of knowing that each individual is treated the same. Now, obviously, it doesn't work that way all the time, but this is what the idea of due process means. The one that you're probably more familiar with, when someone says, I plead the Fifth, this prevents us from having to testify against ourselves in court. No double jeopardy, meaning that you can't be tried 2 times more than once for the same crime. So the government gets one chance to prosecute you. That's why they have to spend so much time collecting evidence, and they have to be absolutely sure that they can have you convicted of a crime before they would take you to trial, because they don't get another chance. Now, this double jeopardy protection is something that we don't see in a lot of other countries. And in a lot of other countries, they can put you on trial, you're found not guilty, and later the government finds more evidence and they can try you again. So you're never really safe from punishment in that way. Now, this last part here, this doesn't really fit with the theme of accused criminals, but it is thrown in here. It's what's called eminent domain. And that means that the government can take private property and convert it for public use. They just have to compensate you for what they take from you. So an easy example for me is I grew up on Quince. It's kind of a big street. It's a 4-lane street. It's got a lot of traffic on there. Our driveway goes right into this main street. Now, Mom still lives there, and Quince has so much traffic that the government may decide that Quince needs to be 6 lanes. And what would happen there is they would just take a part of Mom's front yard. She wouldn't be able to refuse. She wouldn't be able to say, no, those are my favorite bushes or whatever. The government could seize that property from her and convert it to public use, but then she would be compensated for the property that they took. So we'll get into some details about this later and bring up other examples, but that's the concept of eminent domain. There are lots of parts of the Sixth Amendment here, but the ones I need you to make sure that you know the most are these two right here. You have the right to a speedy and public trial. Okay? That's really vague. What is speedy? It means different things to different people. If you got arrested today, you probably think speedy means your trial starts tomorrow. But that's not really workable. So what courts have said is that speedy means within 100 days, which seems kind of insane to me. Also, public trial, meaning that witnesses can come and watch the trial, like your family or supporters or things like that. Also, in a lot of cases, the media, there are some limits on that. We don't have necessarily television cameras in every trial, or in trials of children, we protect their names and things like that. But those are important aspects of our right to trial there. And then there's also the right to counsel. That means that we are able to use attorneys to represent us in court. We're not expected to be experts on the law, but the attorney can serve that role for us. Seventh Amendment, this is one of those I promise you never have to remember ever again. This just says that we have a right to a grand jury in civil cases. This doesn't come up in anything we're going to deal with this year. It's pretty rare that it's ever mentioned. Eighth Amendment says that there's no cruel or unusual punishment. So again, those are vague terms. What's cruel and unusual? Is the death penalty cruel? Things like that. And what we think about this changes over time, right? Once upon a time, you would set a person on fire to see if they were a witch, and that was a normal punishment. Surely we don't do that anymore. So our ideas of cruel and unusual punishment change over time, as well as excessive bail. Like if you are arrested for shoplifting a candy bar, we can't make your bail $500,000 because that effectively imprisons you without a trial. So that's one of those things that we'll deal with the Eighth Amendment. All right, like we said, 9 and 10, those are those amendments that help the Constitution be flexible in the future. So the Ninth Amendment says that there are rights reserved to the people. We call these unenumerated rights. What this basically means is that just because it wasn't on this list of 10 rights that you have so far, doesn't mean those are the only rights that people have. So this allows the Constitution to be flexible in the future. Most notably, what we're going to deal with the Ninth Amendment is what we call the right to privacy, which is different than being searched in the Fourth Amendment. But the right to privacy is mostly going to be about people's sexual relationships. And this was an idea that came about in the 1960s, dealing with access to birth control and things like that, which is a concept that was not something that was debated in Congress in 1789 when they're writing the Bill of Rights. So this Ninth Amendment allows flexibility in our idea of what individual rights are. And then the 10th Amendment tells us that anything that this Constitution has not already given to the national government is left up to states. Okay, so the states should have a lot of leeway to make their own policies and things like that. One of the main government functions that we haven't mentioned at all so far in the Articles and Amendments would be school, right? We're all trying to deal with school right now. School's not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution, and so school would be one of those realms of policy that gets left totally up to the states. Okay, so those are just the Bill of Rights. Remember, each one of these limits the power of the national government. Even like 10, it says anything that the national government doesn't have right now belongs to the states. So all these things are what we call civil liberties. They limit the power of the government, and we'll now move on to the rest of these amendments, which are a little more random and all over the place.